The arrow whistled past Garrett Holloway's ear close enough that he felt the displaced air kiss his skin, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was about to die in these cursed mountains far from anything resembling home. His horse had thrown him 2 miles back when a pack of wolves emerged from the tree line, and now he was running on foot through unfamiliar territory, with at least a dozen orc warriors closing in from 3 sides. The forest floor betrayed him with every step, roots snagging his boots and loose stones turning under his weight, while behind him came the rhythmic thunder of pursuit and voices calling to each other in their guttural tongue. He had been scouting for Lord Pemberton's forces, mapping the northern approaches where rumors claimed an orc settlement had taken root near the contested borderlands. 3 weeks of careful observation from hidden vantage points, sketching crude maps by moonlight, and living on dried meat and rainwater collected in his tin cup. He had been so careful, so methodical, never lighting fires and moving only at dawn and dusk when the light played tricks on watching eyes. But yesterday morning he had grown careless, had decided to get closer to the orc encampment to count their numbers more accurately, and someone had spotted him. Now Garrett crashed through a thicket of brambles that tore at his leather jerkin and left bloody scratches across his face. His lungs burned and his legs screamed for rest, but the sound of pursuit never faltered. He burst into a small clearing and made the mistake of glancing back, seeing green-skinned figures moving through the forest with a speed and grace that made his own flight seem clumsy and desperate. They were not even breathing hard, he realized with growing horror. They were simply running him down like wolves with a wounded deer. His foot caught on something hidden in the long grass, and suddenly the world tilted sideways. Garrett hit the ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs, tasted blood where he had bitten his tongue, and when he tried to rise his ankle sent a bolt of white-hot agony up his leg. Sprained at minimum, possibly broken. He dragged himself toward a fallen log, knowing it was futile but unable to simply lie there and wait for death. His hand went to the knife at his belt, the only weapon he had left after dropping his bow somewhere in the mad flight. The orcs emerged into the clearing in a loose semicircle, cutting off any hope of escape. There were 8 of them that he could see, all tall and powerfully built, with green skin that ranged from pale jade to deep forest hues. They wore leather and furs, practical clothing designed for movement and survival in these harsh mountains. Most carried spears or axes, weapons that looked well used and carefully maintained. Their faces were difficult for Garrett to read, the prominent tusks jutting from their lower jaws and the angular structure of their features foreign to his human understanding of expression. One of them, a male with ritual scars across his broad shoulders, said something in their language and several others laughed. The sound was not cruel exactly, but it held no warmth for the human trapped before them. Garrett tightened his grip on his knife, knowing it was pathetic but refusing to simply surrender. If he was going to die here, he would at least die fighting. He has spirit, one of the orcs said in heavily accented but understandable human speech. Foolish spirit, but spirit nonetheless. Should we kill him now or bring him back? Another asked, switching to the human tongue with less fluency. Chief will want to question him about why humans scout our territory. Kill him, the scarred one said flatly. Dead scouts cannot return with information. Garrett braced himself, muscles coiling despite the screaming pain in his ankle, preparing for one final desperate move. But before any of the orcs could advance, a voice cut through the clearing like a blade through silk, stopping everyone in their tracks. Hold. The word was not shouted, but it carried absolute authority. The orcs immediately stepped back, creating a gap in their line, and through that gap walked a figure that made Garrett's breath catch in his throat for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She was taller than him by several inches, built with the kind of powerful musculature that came from a lifetime of physical training and combat. Her skin was a deep green, darker than most of the others, and marked with white ritual scars that formed intricate patterns across her arms and shoulders. Long black hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung between her shoulder blades, and her face was striking in its fierce beauty. High cheekbones and a strong jaw framing eyes that glowed amber in the dappled forest light. She wore leather armor that had seen considerable use, fitted to her frame with the precision of something custom-made, and carried a massive two-handed sword strapped across her back. But it was not her appearance that held everyone's attention. It was the way she moved, the absolute confidence in every step, and the way the other orcs immediately deferred to her presence. This was someone important, Garrett realized, someone dangerous. She approached him slowly, those amber eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed despite being fully clothed. Her gaze traveled over his torn clothing, his bleeding scratches, the way he favored his injured ankle, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps a kind of recognition. "This one is mine," she said, speaking in the human tongue with far better pronunciation than the others. Her voice was deep and rich, with a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in Garrett's chest. The scarred orc who had suggested killing Garrett immediately stepped forward, his posture aggressive. "Thora, he is a scout, an enemy. We should execute him and be done with it." So her name was Thora. Garrett filed that information away, still gripping his knife, but beginning to realize that stabbing any of these warriors would accomplish nothing, except hastening his own death. Thora turned to face the scarred orc, and though she did not raise her voice, the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop several degrees. "I am the strongest warrior of this tribe, Krogan. I have won that right in 37 challenge fights. When I say this human is mine, that is not a request for your opinion. That is a statement of fact." Krogan's jaw worked, his tusks grinding together, but he dropped his gaze first. "As you say, Thora, but the chief will question this decision." "The chief may question whatever he wishes," Thora replied. "But he knows the law as well as you do. A warrior may claim spoils of battle. This human is my spoil. The word settled over Garrett like a shroud. So he was not to be killed immediately, but what fate awaited him as this orc woman's property? He had heard stories, whispered around campfires when his unit thought their officers were not listening, about what orcs did to captured humans. Most of those stories involved torture, slavery, or being used as practice targets for young warriors learning to fight. Thora approached him again, moving with a predator's grace, and crouched down so they were at eye level. This close, Garrett could see that her amber eyes held flecks of gold, and that the ritual scars on her arms were not random marks, but formed images of what might have been wolves or bears. She smelled of leather and pine smoke and something else, something earthy and wild that his civilized mind had no name for. "Give me the knife," she said quietly. "You are injured and surrounded. The blade will not save you, and I would prefer not to break your wrist taking it from you." Garrett's hand trembled slightly, and he hated himself for that show of weakness. But she was right. He was one injured human facing 9 orc warriors, one of whom was apparently legendary among her people. The knife was a psychological comfort, nothing more. He released his grip on the weapon and let it fall to the grass between them. Thora picked it up with casual efficiency, examined the blade for a moment with what might have been approval, and tucked it into her own belt. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Not well," Garrett admitted, seeing no point in lying. "I think I sprained my ankle in the fall." Thora nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Then, without warning, she scooped him up in her arms as easily as he might have lifted a child. Garrett made an undignified sound of surprise and instinctively grabbed at her shoulders for balance, which only made several of the watching orcs laugh openly. "Stop squirming," Thora said, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be." Heat flooded Garrett's face, embarrassment warring with the surreal nature of his situation. He was being carried like a bride through a forest clearing by an orc woman who could probably snap his spine with her bare hands, while her companions looked on with varying degrees of entertainment. If he survived this, he would never be able to tell anyone this part of the story. Thora began walking, and the other orcs fell into formation around them, though Garrett noticed that none of them got particularly close to their apparent champion. They moved through the forest with practiced ease, following paths that Garrett's human eyes could barely distinguish from the surrounding terrain. He tried to memorize landmarks, thinking vaguely about escape, but his ankle throbbed with every step Thora took, and he knew he would not get far even if an opportunity presented itself. The journey took perhaps an hour, though Garrett's sense of time had become unreliable. They emerged from the forest onto a plateau that overlooked a wide valley, and there, spread out below them, was the orc settlement he had been observing from a distance. It was larger than he had estimated, with perhaps 200 inhabitants based on the number of structures. The buildings were a mix of permanent wooden longhouses and hide tents, arranged in a rough circle around a central gathering area. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and Garrett could see figures moving about their daily business, children playing near the animal pens, adults working at various tasks. It looked, he realized with some discomfort, remarkably like any human village might look from a distance. Thora carried him down a winding path into the settlement, and their arrival drew immediate attention. Orcs stopped their work to stare, conversations dying as people noticed the human being carried in their strongest warrior's arms. Garrett heard murmurs in their language, could not understand the words but recognized tones of surprise, curiosity, and in some cases, hostility. A crowd began to gather, following them toward what appeared to be the largest structure in the settlement. A longhouse decorated with carved wooden posts and animal skulls. Thora ignored the attention completely, her expression serene and her stride confident, as if carrying human prisoners was something she did every day. They entered the longhouse, and Garrett's eyes needed a moment to adjust to the dimmer interior. The space was large and open, with a fire pit in the center and sleeping platforms arranged along the walls. Furs and weapons decorated the space, along with what appeared to be trophies from hunts, antlers and hides, and one massive bear skull that had been mounted on the far wall. Thora finally set him down on one of the sleeping platforms, which was covered in thick furs and actually quite comfortable. Garrett's ankle screamed in relief at no longer being jostled, and he carefully arranged himself so his back was against the wall, giving him a view of the entire room. "Wait here," Thora said, which struck Garrett as somewhat absurd given that he could barely walk. "I need to speak with the chief and explain your presence. Do not do anything foolish." "Like what?" Garrett asked, unable to stop himself. "Make a daring escape by crawling very slowly toward the door." For just a moment, he thought he saw amusement flicker in those amber eyes. Then Thora turned and left, leaving him alone in the longhouse with nothing but his thoughts and his fear for company. Garrett tested his ankle carefully, probing the swollen flesh with gentle fingers. Definitely sprained, possibly worse. He would not be running anywhere for at least a few days, maybe longer. which meant his survival depended entirely on the whims of his captors, and specifically on the whims of the orc woman who had claimed him as hers. He tried to think logically about his situation, to plan and strategize as his training had taught him, but exhaustion was catching up with him. The adrenaline that had kept him running was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the accumulated aches of his flight through the forest. His scratches stung, his ankle throbbed, and his tongue was still bleeding slightly where he had bitten it. The door opened and Garrett tensed, but it was not Thora who entered. Instead, an elderly orc woman shuffled in, carrying a basket of what appeared to be medical supplies. Her skin was weathered and pale green, her hair white with age, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints no longer cooperated the way they once had. She said something in the orc language, saw his blank expression, and switched to heavily accented human speech. "I am Gresha, healer. Thora says I am to tend your injuries." "That is very kind," Garrett said cautiously, not sure what else to say. The idea of an orc healing him rather than causing him harm was so contrary to everything he had been taught that he struggled to process it. Gresha made a dismissive sound and set her basket down. "Kind has nothing to do with it. Thora claims you, so you are her responsibility. If you die of infection, it reflects poorly on her. Give me your foot." Garrett carefully extended his injured leg, and Gresha began examining the ankle with surprisingly gentle fingers. She muttered to herself in her own language, occasionally switching to human speech to explain what she was doing. The ankle was badly sprained but not broken, which was better news than Garrett had hoped for. She wrapped it in strips of cloth soaked in something that smelled strongly of herbs, then moved on to cleaning the scratches on his face and arms. "You are very young," Gresha observed as she worked. "Too young to be scouting alone in hostile territory." "I am 22, Garrett said, though he was not sure why he felt the need to defend his age to an orc healer. 22, Gresha repeated and made that dismissive sound again. "A child." "What were your people thinking, sending a child into these mountains?" "I volunteered," Garrett said quietly. "I am good at moving quietly and drawing maps. It seemed like a way to be useful." Gresha paused in her work and looked at him directly for the first time, her eyes a cloudy gray but still sharp with intelligence. "Useful. Yes, and now you are captured and your people will think you are dead, and whatever maps you drew are gone. Very useful indeed." The words stung because they were true. Garrett had lost his satchel somewhere in his flight, which meant all his careful observations were gone. He had failed his mission, failed his lord, and now was a prisoner of the very people he had been sent to spy on. Some scout he had turned out to be. Gresha finished her ministrations and packed up her supplies. "The ankle will heal if you stay off it for a few days. The scratches are shallow. You will live, though what kind of life Thora has planned for you I cannot say." "What does she want with me?" Garrett asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. The old healer paused at the door and looked back at him with an expression he could not read. "That is between you and her. But I will say this, young human. Thora is the strongest warrior of this tribe. She is also the most honorable. If she has claimed you, she has her reasons, and those reasons are not what you fear. Try to remember that in the days to come." Then she was gone, leaving Garrett alone once more with his thoughts and his questions and his steadily growing exhaustion. He lay back on the furs, meaning to just rest his eyes for a moment, and fell almost immediately into a deep and dreamless sleep. When Garrett woke, the light coming through the gaps in the longhouse walls had changed to the deep gold of late afternoon. His body ached all over, stiff from the combination of his flight and his injuries, but his mind was clearer than it had been before sleep claimed him. Someone had left food beside the sleeping platform, a wooden bowl containing some kind of stew and a piece of dark bread. His stomach growled at the sight, and after a moment's hesitation, Garrett ate. If they wanted him dead, there were easier ways than poison. The stew was good, rich with meat and root vegetables, seasoned with herbs he did not recognize but that tasted earthy and satisfying. The bread was dense and chewy, the kind that filled your stomach and gave you strength for physical labor. He was scraping the last bits from the bowl when the door opened and Thora entered. She looked tired, Garrett noticed, as if she had been arguing with someone for a long time. But her expression softened slightly when she saw he was awake and had eaten. "Good," she said, crossing the space to stand near his sleeping platform. "Gresha said your injuries are not serious. You were fortunate." "Was I?" Garrett asked, unable to keep a note of bitterness from his voice. "I am a prisoner in an enemy camp, injured and alone. Forgive me if I do not feel particularly fortunate." Thora tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are alive. Many of my warriors wanted you dead. That is fortunate, whether you appreciate it or not." "Why?" The question burst from Garrett before he could stop it. "Why did you claim me? What do you want with a human scout?" For a long moment, Thora did not answer. She moved to the fire pit and began building up the flames, her movements practiced and efficient. When she finally spoke, she did not look at him, keeping her eyes on the fire. "3 years ago I was injured in a challenge fight," she said quietly. "My opponent struck me across the back with an axe. The blow should have killed me, but I am stubborn and refuse to die. I was weak for many months, unable to fight, barely able to walk. During that time, I learned what it was to be helpless, to depend on others for everything. I learned humility." She paused, adjusted a log in the fire, and continued. "When I saw you in that clearing, injured and surrounded, I saw myself as I was then, defiant even in defeat, and I thought perhaps the spirits had sent you to me for a reason." "What reason?" Garrett asked, struggling to understand. Thora finally turned to face him, and in the firelight her features seemed softer, less alien. "That I do not yet know, but I believe there is a purpose to your presence here. So I claimed you to keep you alive until that purpose becomes clear." It was not the answer Garrett had been expecting, and he had no idea how to respond. He had expected cruelty or pragmatism, to be told he would be ransomed or used as a bargaining chip. Instead, this orc woman spoke of spirits and purpose, and seeing herself in his desperate struggle. "I am not your redemption," he said finally, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "I am not some kind of spiritual lesson. I am just a man who made a mistake and got caught." "Perhaps," Thora agreed. "Or perhaps you are more than you know. Time will tell." She moved to another sleeping platform on the opposite side of the longhouse and began removing her armor, and Garrett realized with a start that this was her home. She had brought him to her own dwelling, which meant they would be living in close proximity for however long his captivity lasted. "This is your home?" he asked, needing to confirm his suspicion. "It is," Thora said, not looking up from the buckles she was unfastening. "Warriors of sufficient rank are granted their own longhouses. I have lived here alone since I achieved the title of strongest warrior 3 years ago. And now you have brought a prisoner to share your space." "I have brought someone under my protection to share my space," Thora corrected. "There is a difference. You are not my prisoner, Garrett Holloway. You are my responsibility." Garrett started at the sound of his name. "How do you know my name?" "Your people are not the only ones who can scout and gather information," Thora said, and there was definitely amusement in her voice now. "We have known about Lord Pemberton's forces for weeks. We know the names of his officers, his strategies, his supply lines." "Did you think your people were the only ones with scouts?" The realization was humbling. Garrett had thought he was being so clever, so careful, but the orcs had known about his people's plans all along. They had probably been watching them, amused by his attempts at stealth. "What will happen now?" Garrett asked quietly. "Will there be a war?" Thora finally removed the last piece of her armor and stretched, her shoulders popping. Even in the simple tunic she wore underneath, she was an imposing figure, all lean muscle and coiled strength. "That depends on your people," she said. "We have no interest in war. We simply wish to live in these mountains in peace. But if Lord Pemberton's forces attack, we will defend ourselves. And we will win." There was no boasting in her voice, just quiet certainty. Garrett thought about the warriors he had seen, their weapons and their confidence, and suspected she was probably right. His people thought of orcs as primitive savages, but what he had observed suggested a well-organized society with skilled fighters and tactical awareness. "I need to sleep," Thora said, settling onto her sleeping platform and pulling furs over herself. "You should do the same. Tomorrow we will discuss what happens next." "What if I try to escape?" Garrett asked, though he was not sure why. Maybe he just needed to know how she would react. Thora's laugh was low and rich, and it sent an odd shiver down Garrett's spine. "With your injured ankle, you would not make it past the door, but if you somehow did, you would be lost in unfamiliar mountains, alone and unarmed. You would die within a day, probably less. So please be my guest if you wish to attempt escape. I will not stop you." Her confidence was infuriating, but Garrett could not argue with the logic. He was trapped here, at least until his ankle healed, and maybe even after that. The smart thing to do was cooperate, learn what he could, and wait for an opportunity that might never come. He lay back on the furs and stared at the ceiling of the longhouse, watching shadows dance in the firelight. Across the room, Thora's breathing gradually slowed and deepened, falling into the regular rhythm of sleep. Garrett listened to that sound and tried not to think about how strange his life had become in the space of a single day. The days that followed fell into a routine that was both monotonous and oddly comfortable. Thora left each morning after eating a quick breakfast, going off to her duties as the tribe's strongest warrior, which apparently involved training younger fighters and settling disputes, and occasionally going on hunts. Garrett was left alone in the longhouse with instructions to rest his ankle and not do anything foolish. For the first few days, he obeyed, partly because his ankle genuinely hurt and partly because he was too intimidated by his situation to attempt anything reckless. Gresha came by twice a day to check his injuries and change the wrapping on his ankle, and she always brought food, simple but filling meals that kept his strength up. She spoke little beyond what was necessary for her medical care, but her presence was strangely comforting. Other orcs occasionally passed by the longhouse, and Garrett could hear them talking outside, though he rarely understood the words. Sometimes children would peek through the gaps in the walls, their large eyes curious, and he would hear adult voices scolding them and shooing them away. He was a curiosity, he realized, maybe the first human many of these orcs had ever seen up close. On the fourth day, Garrett's ankle was feeling well enough that he attempted to stand and put weight on it. The joint protested but held, and he managed a few careful steps around the longhouse before the pain forced him to sit down again. Progress, at least. He was determined not to be completely helpless. Thora returned that evening carrying a brace of rabbits she had caught, and her eyes narrowed when she saw him standing. Gresha said to stay off that ankle. Gresha said to not put full weight on it for several days, Garrett corrected. I was just testing it gently. I cannot lie around forever. Thora considered this, then nodded. Fair enough. But if you re-injure it through stubbornness, you will have only yourself to blame. She set about preparing the rabbits for cooking, working with the easy competence of someone who had performed this task 1,000 times. Garrett watched her, noting the efficiency of her movements, the way her hands knew exactly what to do without conscious thought. "May I help?" he asked, the words surprising himself. Thora looked up, clearly surprised as well. "You want to help prepare food?" "I want to be useful," Garrett said. "I am going to go mad if I just sit here day after day doing nothing. Please. I can work sitting down." After a moment, Thora gestured for him to join her by the fire pit. She showed him how to skin the rabbits properly, her hands guiding his when he fumbled with the knife, and he tried very hard not to think about how close she was, or how her breath stirred the hair near his ear when she leaned in to demonstrate a technique. They worked in companionable silence, and when the rabbits were prepared and roasting over the fire, Thora surprised him by speaking. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" Garrett asked. "More fear. More hatred." "You are a human, and humans are taught that orcs are monsters. Yet you sit here helping me prepare dinner as if this were the most natural thing in the world." Garrett thought about that. "I was afraid. I am still afraid sometimes, but you have not hurt me. You have fed me and healed me and given me shelter. It is hard to hate someone who does those things, regardless of what color their skin is." Thora's expression was unreadable in the firelight. "Many of my people would say you are simply being clever, waiting for an opportunity to betray me." "Are you worried I will betray you?" Garrett asked. "No," Thora said immediately. "If I thought you would not be here." "Then why does it matter what others think?" Thora smiled, a real smile that showed her tusks and made her whole face light up. "You are wise for one so young." Garrett Holloway. That night, they ate together and talked about inconsequential things, and Garrett found himself relaxing in a way he had not since his capture. Thora was surprisingly easy to talk to once she dropped her warrior's reserve, and she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. He told her about growing up in a small village, about his mother who was a weaver, and his father who had died in a border skirmish when Garrett was 12. She told him about orc traditions, about the challenge fights that determined rank and status, about the harsh beauty of the mountains and the spirits that her people believed dwelt in every tree and stone. When they finally settled onto their respective sleeping platforms, Garrett felt more at peace than he had in weeks. It was a dangerous feeling, he knew. He was still a captive, still an enemy to her people, still trapped in a situation that could turn deadly at any moment. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the fire crackle and Thora's breathing slow, he could almost pretend that this was normal, that this was home. The next morning brought a harsh reminder that nothing about his situation was normal or safe. Garrett was attempting to walk around the longhouse, testing his ankle's improved strength, when the door slammed open and Krogan, the scarred orc who had wanted to kill him in the forest, strode in with 3 other warriors at his back. "Where is Thora?" Krogan demanded in the human tongue, his accent making the words sharp and aggressive. "She left this morning," Garrett said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I do not know where she went." Krogan's eyes narrowed. "Convenient. The strongest warrior leaves her pet human unguarded. Perhaps she grows careless." "I am not a pet," Garrett said, which was probably stupid, but the insult stung. One of the other orcs laughed, a cruel sound. "It talks back. How amusing. Tell me, human, does Thora keep you for entertainment? Do you warm her bed at night like a good little slave?" Heat flooded Garrett's face, a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Nothing like that has happened. She gave me shelter and healing, that is all." "That is all," Krogan repeated mockingly. He took a step closer and Garrett instinctively backed up, which only made Krogan smile. "You are a scout for our enemies. You came here to spy on us, to gather information so your people could attack our home. And Thora, our strongest warrior, protects you like you are one of our own. Do you not see how that looks? I see that she is honorable, Garrett said, though his voice shook slightly. I see that she does not kill helpless prisoners. Honorable, Krogan spat. She is a fool, and you are a liability that will get our people killed. He moved fast, faster than Garrett would have thought possible for someone so large. And suddenly, there was a knife at Garrett's throat, the blade cold against his skin. The other orcs spread out, blocking any path to the door, and Garrett realized with sick certainty that Krogan had come here to finish what he had started in the forest. Thora may have claimed you, Krogan said quietly, his breath hot on Garrett's face, but she is not here now. And accidents happen. Prisoners try to escape and must be stopped. Who would question that story? I would. Thora's voice came from the doorway, low and deadly, and Krogan froze. Garrett could not see her, not with Krogan blocking his view, but he felt the temperature in the longhouse drop as if winter had suddenly arrived. Step away from him, Krogan, Thora said, her voice still quiet but somehow more menacing for it. Step away now, or what happens next will not be an accident. For a long moment, Krogan did not move. The knife pressed fractionally harder against Garrett's throat, not quite breaking skin but close. Then, slowly, the scarred orc lowered the blade and stepped back. Thora entered the longhouse, and Garrett saw that she was not alone. Behind her came an elderly orc male, his skin pale gray with age, carrying a staff carved with intricate symbols. This, Garrett guessed, was the tribe's chief. "Explain yourself, Krogan," the chief said, his voice raspy but carrying undeniable authority. "Why do I find you in Thora's home with a weapon drawn on her claimed responsibility?" "The human is a threat," Krogan said, but he sounded less certain now. "I was ensuring he could not escape and endanger our people." With a knife to his throat, Thora's voice was like ice. "An interesting method of prevention, or were you perhaps attempting murder and hoping to claim it was necessary?" "I was protecting the tribe," Krogan insisted. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do, Thora. You have gone soft. You protect our enemies while putting your own people at risk." "I protect one unarmed, injured human who poses no threat to anyone," Thora shot back. "You, meanwhile, violate one of our most sacred laws by threatening someone under another warrior's protection." "Who is really putting the tribe at risk, Krogan?" The chief raised his hand, silencing them both. He moved closer to Garrett, studying him with eyes that were cloudy with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence. "You are the human scout," the chief said. It was not a question. "The one who has been watching our settlement for 3 weeks." "Yes," Garrett said, seeing no point in lying. "I am Garrett Holloway, scout for Lord Pemberton's forces. I was captured while gathering information about your tribe's numbers and defenses." "Honest, at least," the chief observed. "And what did you learn in your 3 weeks of observation, Garrett Holloway?" Garrett hesitated, trying to decide how much truth to share. Then he thought about Thora's hand guiding his as she taught him to skin rabbits, about Gresha's gentle fingers tending his injuries, about the children playing outside who reminded him of the children in his own village. "I learned that you are not the monsters my people believe you to be," he said quietly. "I learned that you have families and traditions and honor. I learned that maybe the real monsters are the ones who send scouts to gather information for an unprovoked attack." The chief's eyebrows rose. "You question your own people's motives." "I question everyone's motives now," Garrett said, "including my own. I thought I was being useful, being a good soldier, but all I have really done is put innocent people at risk." Krogan made a disgusted sound. "This is pathetic." The human says what Thora wants to hear, plays on her misplaced sympathy. He is manipulating her, can you not see that? What I see, the chief said slowly, is a young human who is questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. That is not manipulation, Krogan. That is wisdom. He turned to Thora. What do you intend to do with him? Thora moved to stand beside Garrett, not quite touching him but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. I intend to keep him under my protection until I am certain he is healed and safe. After that, the decision of what to do will be his. He may stay or he may leave. I will not hold him against his will. You would let him return to his people, Krogan demanded. Let him report everything he has learned. If that is his choice, yes, Thora said firmly. I will not make him a prisoner. Either he stays because he wishes to, or he leaves as a free man. The chief studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right as the one who claimed him, but Krogan raises a valid concern. If this human returns to his people and tells them everything, we may face attack. If he returns to his people and tells them everything, Thora said, he will tell them that we are not mindless savages to be slaughtered without thought. He will tell them we are a people who value honor and mercy. Perhaps that will make them reconsider their plans. Or perhaps it will make them attack sooner before we can prepare, Krogan muttered. Enough, the chief said, his voice cutting through the tension. I have made my decision. The human may remain under Thora's protection. But Krogan, you and your warriors will watch him. If he attempts to escape or to harm anyone in this tribe, you have my permission to stop him by whatever means necessary. Is this understood? Yes, Chief, Krogan said, though his expression suggested he was not happy with the decision. Good. Now leave us. Thora, a word with you outside. The chief and Thora stepped out of the longhouse, leaving Garrett alone with Krogan and his warriors. The scarred orc stared at him with undisguised hatred, and Garrett forced himself to meet that gaze without flinching. You are living on borrowed time, human, Krogan said quietly. Thora's protection will not last forever, and when it ends I will be waiting. Then he and his warriors left, and Garrett was alone, his legs shaking with delayed reaction. He sank down onto the sleeping platform, his mind reeling from how close he had come to death. If Thora had not returned when she did, if the chief had not been with her, Garrett had no doubt Krogan would have killed him and claimed it was necessary. Thora returned a few minutes later, her expression troubled. She sat down heavily on her own sleeping platform and was silent for a long time. Thank you, Garrett said finally, for saving my life. Again. The chief is concerned, Thora said, ignoring his thanks. He believes that having you here creates division within the tribe. Krogan is not the only one who questions my decision to protect you. There are others who see you as a threat or as a sign of weakness on my part. Maybe they are right, Garrett said quietly. Maybe I am a threat. Maybe you should have let them kill me in the forest. Thora's head snapped up, her amber eyes fierce. Do not say that. Do not ever say that. Your life has value, Garrett Holloway, regardless of what uniform you wear or what orders you follow. If more people understood that simple truth, there would be far less blood spilled in this world. But at what cost to you? Garrett asked. You are risking your reputation, your standing in the tribe, maybe even your life, all for a stranger. Why? I still do not understand why. Thora stood and moved to the fire pit, staring into the flames as if seeking answers there. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost vulnerable. When I was injured and helpless, I learned what it was to be alone, she said. I learned that strength is not just about how hard you can hit or how well you can fight. Real strength is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It is about standing for what is right even when it is difficult. You were helpless and alone, and I had the power to help you. How could I not? Garrett felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He had spent his whole life being told that orcs were savage and cruel, that they had no honor or compassion. Yet here was Thora, risking everything for a human scout who by all rights should have been her enemy. "I do not deserve your protection," he said quietly. "None of us deserve the kindness we receive," Thora replied. "We can only try to be worthy of it." That night, Garrett lay awake long after Thora had fallen asleep, thinking about her words and about the choice that would eventually face him. He could stay here, in this orc settlement that had become less frightening and more familiar with each passing day. Or he could leave, return to his own people, try to resume the life he had known before his capture. But the truth was, he was not sure he wanted to return to that life. Not anymore. Something had changed in him during his time here, some fundamental shift in how he saw the world. And that change was due in large part to the orc woman sleeping across the room, the strongest warrior of her tribe, who had chosen mercy when she could have chosen violence. The next few weeks passed more smoothly. Garrett's ankle healed completely, and he began helping Thora with various tasks around the longhouse, cooking and cleaning and maintaining weapons. He learned bits of the orc language, enough to exchange basic greetings with the tribe members who passed by, though many of them still regarded him with suspicion or outright hostility. Krogan and his followers watched constantly, and Garrett could feel their eyes on him whenever he left the longhouse. He tried not to let it bother him, tried to focus on the present rather than worrying about threats that might never materialize. Thora began taking him with her on short trips outside the settlement, always staying close to the village, but giving him a chance to move and exercise his healed ankle. They walked through the forest together, and she taught him to recognize plants that were edible or medicinal, taught him to read tracks and signs that spoke of the animals that lived in these mountains. He found himself looking forward to these excursions, to the companionable silence between them, and the occasional conversations that ranged from mundane topics to deeper philosophical questions. One afternoon, nearly a month after his capture, they were sitting by a stream watching the water flow when Thora asked him the question he had been dreading. "Your ankle is healed," she said quietly. "You could leave now if you wished. Return to your people." Garrett picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I could," he agreed, "but you have not mentioned wanting to leave." "No," Garrett said, "I have not." Thora was silent for a moment, then asked, Why indeed?" How could he explain the way he felt when she smiled at one of his clumsy attempts to speak her language? How could he describe the peace he found in their quiet evenings by the fire, working on small tasks together? How could he tell her that the thought of leaving, of never seeing her again, made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with his old injuries? "I have been thinking," Garrett said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "about what defines an enemy. Is it the color of their skin or the language they speak? Or is it their actions, their choices? I came here believing I knew who my enemies were, but you have shown me kindness and mercy. You have healed me and protected me. That is not the behavior of an enemy." "And your people?" Thora asked. "If you return, what will you tell them?" "The truth," Garrett said. "That the orcs of these mountains are not the monsters we thought them to be, that they are simply people trying to live in peace. Whether my lord will listen, I cannot say, but at least I will have tried." "You could die for telling that truth," Thora said, her voice tight. "Your people will call you a traitor or claim the orcs have bewitched you. They may execute you for refusing to provide the intelligence they sent you to gather." "I know," Garrett said, "but what is the alternative?" "I could lie, tell them what they want to hear, help them plan an attack that would kill innocent people. I cannot do that. Not anymore." Thora stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the stream, her back to him, and Garrett could see the tension in her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was rough with emotion. "You should stay." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Garrett stood and moved closer, close enough to see the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Thora, I know it is selfish," she continued, still not looking at him. "I know you have a life, a family, a world beyond this tribe, but I am asking anyway. Stay, not as my responsibility or my claimed spoil. Stay because you want to. Stay because—" She stopped, seemed to struggle with something, then said quietly, "Stay because I do not want you to leave." Garrett's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break free from his chest. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her shoulder, feeling her muscles tense under his hand. "Thora, look at me, please." She turned, and he saw that her amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. In that moment, the strongest warrior of the tribe looked achingly vulnerable, and Garrett realized with sudden clarity that he was not the only one who had been changed by their time together. "I do not want to leave either," he said softly. "But if I stay, it has to be for the right reasons. Not because I am afraid of what my people will do, not because I feel obligated to you. If I stay, it would be because—" He paused, gathering his courage. "It would be because when I think about my future, the only version that makes sense is the one where you are in it." Thora drew in a sharp breath, and for a moment they just stared at each other, the implications of his words settling between them. Then, moving slowly as if afraid he would startle her, Garrett reached up and cupped her face with his hand, his palm against her strong jaw, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Is that foolish?" he asked quietly. "A human and an orc. Our peoples are enemies. My staying here would cause problems for you, more division in the tribe. Maybe I should leave, if only to make your life easier." "Easier is not always better," Thora said, her voice hoarse. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "I've had an easy life in many ways. I am strong, skilled, respected. But I have also been alone. And then you came, this human scout who should have been my enemy, and suddenly nothing was simple anymore. But it was better. You made everything better." "I am not strong like you," Garrett said. "I cannot fight like you or lead like you. What could I possibly offer you?" Thora smiled, and it transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her physical appearance. "You offer me something I did not know I was missing. Understanding. Companionship. Someone who sees me not as the strongest warrior, but simply as Thora. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" She pulled his hand away from her face but kept hold of it, threading her fingers through his. Her hand was larger than his, her skin darker green, and the contrast should have been strange but instead felt perfectly right. "If you stay," she said carefully, "it will not be easy. Many in the tribe will oppose it. You will face prejudice and suspicion. Krogan will never accept you, and there will be others like him. And your own people will likely consider you dead or a traitor. You will be caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either." "I know," Garrett said. "But if the alternative is leaving and never seeing you again, I will take the difficulty. If you will have me, if you want me to stay." "Want you to stay?" Thora laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "I have wanted that since the day I carried you into my home. I just did not want to admit it, not even to myself. It seemed too impossible, too complicated. But yes, Garrett Holloway, I want you to stay. I want—" She paused, then continued with fierce determination. "I want you. Not as a responsibility or a claimed prize. I want you as a partner. As someone I choose to share my life with." Garrett felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that he had never experienced before. He stepped closer until they were nearly touching and looked up into her amber eyes. "Then I choose to stay," he said. "I choose you, Thora. Whatever challenges come, we will face them together." She pulled him into an embrace, and Garrett wrapped his arms around her waist, feeling the strength of her body against his, breathing in the scent of leather and pine smoke and that indefinable wildness that was uniquely hers. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other by the stream while the water flowed past and the sun moved across the sky. When they finally returned to the settlement that evening, walking side by side with their fingers intertwined, Garrett felt the weight of many eyes upon them. He saw surprise, curiosity, and in some faces, disapproval or anger. But he also saw acceptance in some of the older orcs' expressions, and cautious hope in others. The chief himself was standing outside his longhouse, and he watched their approach with an unreadable expression. When they drew near, he gestured for them to stop. "So," he said, his raspy voice carrying across the gathering crowd, "the human scout has made his decision." "I have," Garrett said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I wish to remain here with Thora if the tribe will accept me." "And if we do not," Krogan's voice came from the crowd, "if we say you are not welcome here, then I will stay anyway," Garrett said, meeting the scarred orc's hostile gaze. "I will live outside the settlement if I must, in the forest, but I will not leave these mountains and I will not leave Thora." Murmurs rippled through the assembled orcs, and the chief raised his hand for silence. "Bold words, human, but words are easy. How do we know you will not betray us? How do we know this is not some elaborate trick to gather more information for your people?" "You do not," Garrett said honestly. "You have only my word, and I understand if that is not enough. But I swear to you, on whatever honor I have, that I have no intention of betraying this tribe. If my people attack, I will fight beside you to defend your home. This is my home now." "He speaks truth," Gresha's voice came from the crowd, and the old healer pushed her way forward. "I have watched this human for weeks. He is not deceiving us. He has found something here worth more to him than any loyalty to his former people." "Love makes fools of us all," Krogan said bitterly. "This will end in disaster. Mark my words." "Perhaps," the chief said slowly, "or perhaps this is an opportunity. A human who chooses to live among us, who can speak both languages and understand both peoples. That could be valuable if we are to avoid war." He moved closer to Garrett, studying him intently. "You understand what you are asking. You will be neither fully human nor orc. You will be something new, something between. That is a lonely path." "He will not be alone," Thora said firmly. "He will have me." The chief's eyes shifted to her, and something in his expression softened. "And you are certain this is what you want, Thora, to bind yourself to a human? You are our strongest warrior. You could have your choice of any orc in this tribe or any neighboring tribe. Why choose this human?" "Because he sees me," Thora said simply. "Because when I am with him, I am not just the strongest warrior. I am simply Thora. And that is worth more to me than any other consideration." The chief was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Garrett Holloway, formerly scout for Lord Pemberton's forces, I grant you permission to remain in this settlement. You will be under Thora's protection until such time as you prove yourself worthy of the tribe's trust. You will work, you will contribute, and you will follow our laws as if you were one of our own. Do you accept these terms?" "I do," Garrett said, relief flooding through him. "Then it is done," the chief said. He raised his voice so the entire gathered crowd could hear. "This human is now part of our tribe. Any who harm him will answer to me and to Thora. Is this understood?" There were murmurs of assent, though Garrett could see some faces that looked far from happy with the decision. Krogan turned and stalked away, his warriors following, and Garrett knew he had made a permanent enemy there. But when he looked at Thora, saw the joy and relief in her amber eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That night they celebrated with a feast. The tribe roasted game and made their traditional flatbreads, and there was a fermented drink that tasted like bitter honey and made Garrett's head spin after just one cup. Orcs played instruments he did not recognize, creating music that was wild and rhythmic and strangely beautiful. Children danced around the central fire, and some of the braver ones approached Garrett with questions in broken human speech. Thora stayed close to him throughout the evening, and Garrett noticed how her presence seemed to shield him from the worst of the hostile looks. Some tribe members approached to speak with him, testing his knowledge of their language, asking about human customs. He answered as honestly as he could, trying to bridge the gap between their peoples one conversation at a time. As the night wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Thora led him back to her longhouse. They had shared the space for weeks, but tonight felt different, charged with a new awareness. They were no longer captor and captive, no longer simply two people coexisting in the same space. They were something more, something that neither of them had words for yet. Thora banked the fire and they settled onto their respective sleeping platforms, but Garrett found he could not sleep. His mind kept returning to the events of the day, to the choice he had made, to the feel of Thora's hand in his. "Garrett," Thora's voice came softly from across the longhouse. "Are you awake?" "Yes," he admitted. "Are you having doubts?" "No," Garrett said immediately. "No doubts. I am just thinking about how strange life is. A few weeks ago, I was a scout for an army preparing to attack your people. Now I am a member of your tribe, sharing your home, and I cannot imagine being anywhere else. It is strange, but it is good strange." He heard movement, and then Thora was kneeling beside his sleeping platform, her face barely visible in the dim glow of the banked fire. "May I sit with you?" Garrett shifted over, making room, and Thora settled onto the furs beside him, careful not to crowd him in the limited space. They sat in silence for a moment, shoulders touching, and Garrett felt his heart begin to race. "I am afraid," Thora admitted quietly. "I have faced challenge fights and hunted dangerous game and survived injuries that should have killed me, but this frightens me more than any of that." "This?" Garrett asked. What I feel for you. I have never felt this way about anyone before, and I do not know how to navigate it. What if I do something wrong? What if I hurt you without meaning to? I am strong, Garrett, sometimes too strong." What if Garrett reached out and took her hand, cutting off her words? "You will not hurt me. I trust you, Thora. I have trusted you from the moment you chose to spare my life in that forest clearing. You are the strongest warrior of this tribe, yes, but you are also the gentlest person I have ever known. You have nothing to fear." Thora laughed softly. "The strongest warrior, afraid of her own feelings. Krogan would mock me if he knew." "Then we will not tell Krogan," Garrett said, and was rewarded with a soft laugh from Thora. They sat together in the darkness, hands intertwined, and slowly Thora leaned her head against his shoulder. Garrett marveled at the trust implicit in that gesture, this powerful woman allowing herself to be vulnerable with him. "Stay with me tonight," Thora said softly. "Not for anything improper, just stay close. I do not want to be alone." "I am not going anywhere," Garrett promised. They arranged themselves on the sleeping platform, Garrett lying with his back against the wall and Thora curled against his side, her arm draped across his waist. It should have been awkward, this human and orc pressed together in the intimate darkness, but instead it felt natural, like finding something he had been missing his entire life without realizing it was gone. "Garrett," Thora murmured, already half asleep. "Yes." I am glad you were a terrible scout who got caught. Despite everything, Garrett found himself smiling in the darkness. So am I, Thora. So am I. The weeks that followed were challenging but also deeply rewarding. Garrett threw himself into life in the settlement, determined to prove he was serious about his decision to stay. He learned to hunt with orc weapons, though he was clumsy compared to even the youngest warriors. He helped with food preparation and preservation, drawing on skills his mother had taught him. He tended the tribe's small herd of goats, finding unexpected pleasure in the simple work. Most importantly, he continued to learn the orc language, practicing with anyone willing to teach him. Gresha became an unexpected ally, spending hours correcting his pronunciation and explaining the nuances of grammar. Some of the children adopted him as a curiosity, following him around and giggling at his mistakes. Even some of the adults who had been initially hostile began to warm to him when they saw he was genuinely trying to integrate. Krogan and his followers remained implacably opposed to Garrett's presence, but they did nothing overt under the chief's prohibition. Garrett could feel their hostile eyes watching whenever he moved through the settlement, but he tried not to let it bother him. He had made his choice, and he would live with whatever consequences came. His relationship with Thora deepened with each passing day. They were careful in public, aware of the scrutiny they were under, but in the privacy of the longhouse, they allowed themselves to be more open. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their childhoods and their hopes for the future. Thora taught Garrett about orc traditions and beliefs, while he told her about human customs and the wider world beyond the mountains. Physical affection developed gradually, naturally. A touch on the shoulder became a held hand. A held hand became an embrace. An embrace became stolen kisses in the darkness that left them both breathless and wanting more. But Thora was cautious, always aware of her strength and afraid of accidentally hurting him, and Garrett was patient, willing to let things progress at whatever pace felt right. 2 months after Garrett had officially joined the tribe, the chief summoned both of them to his longhouse. Garrett felt a spike of anxiety, wondering if something had happened, if the chief had changed his mind about allowing him to stay. But when they entered, the chief was smiling, his weathered face creased with what looked like approval. "Sit, both of you. I have been watching the human closely these past weeks, observing how he conducts himself." Garrett and Thora sat on the furs indicated, and Garrett tried not to fidget nervously. The chief poured 3 cups of the fermented drink the orcs favored and handed them out. "Garrett Holloway," the chief said formally, "you have proven yourself to be sincere in your desire to join our tribe. You work hard, you learn our ways, and you treat our people with respect. I have decided to grant you full tribal membership, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Relief flooded through Garrett so powerfully that he felt dizzy. "Thank you, Chief. I promise I will continue to prove worthy of your trust." The chief waved a hand dismissively. "I am not finished. Thora, you are our strongest warrior, our champion. You have earned the right to make your own choices in all things, but I would be a poor chief if I did not at least ask. Are you certain this human is what you want? Are you prepared for the challenges that will come from binding yourself to him?" "I am," Thora said without hesitation. "Garrett is my choice, freely made." "Then I have a proposal for you both," the chief said, leaning back and studying them with those cloudy but still sharp eyes. "In 3 weeks, we will hold our autumn gathering. All the nearby tribes will come to trade and feast and settle disputes. It is also when we recognize new bondings, when warriors who wish to join their lives formally make their declarations before all the tribes." Garrett's heart began to pound, and beside him, he felt Thora tense. The chief was suggesting what Garrett thought he was suggesting. "You want us to formalize our bond?" Thora asked carefully. "Publicly. I think it would be wise," the chief said. "Right now, some see your relationship with Garrett as a temporary thing, an infatuation that will pass. If you formalize your bond during the gathering, it sends a clear message that this is real and permanent. It also allows the other tribes to voice any objections or concerns, which is better than having those concerns fester into future problems." "It could also create those problems," Thora pointed out. "Not all tribes will approve of a human-orc bonding. Some may see it as offensive or unnatural." "True," the chief agreed. "But I think the risk is worth it. Garrett has proven he can be a bridge between our peoples. Making that bridge permanent and official could help secure peace in these lands. And if we face opposition, well, that is nothing you cannot handle. You are our strongest warrior for a reason." He turned his attention to Garrett. "What do you say, human? Are you willing to bond yourself to Thora before all the gathered tribes, to declare yourself hers and she yours for all to witness?" Garrett looked at Thora, saw the hope and fear warring in her amber eyes, and knew his answer. "Yes, I want that. I want everyone to know that Thora and I have chosen each other. If there are challenges, we will face them together." Thora's smile was radiant, and she took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Then yes, we will formalize our bond at the autumn gathering." The chief nodded, satisfied. "Good. This will be talked about for many years, I think. The strongest warrior of our tribe and a human scout bound together. Quite a story." "Stories are only worth telling if they have meaning," Thora said. "I think ours does." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. A bonding ceremony was a significant event in orc culture, and Thora wanted everything to be perfect. Garrett helped as much as he could, though much of the preparation involved traditions and customs he did not fully understand. Gresha took charge of creating their bonding clothes, dyeing leather in deep blues and greens and stitching intricate patterns that represented unity and strength. Thora explained that each bonded pair wore complementary designs, visible symbols of their connection. Garrett was touched by the care and detail that went into every aspect of the ceremony. Word spread beyond the tribe, and Garrett began to notice scouts from other clans appearing in the forest around the settlement, watching and reporting back. Some tribes sent messages of support. Others sent warnings that the bonding was a mistake and would not be recognized. Garrett tried not to let the negative responses worry him, but it was difficult not to feel anxious about the approaching gathering. 2 days before the event, Thora took him into the forest to a place she said was sacred to her people, a clearing where a massive oak tree grew from a boulder that looked like it had been placed there by giants. The tree's roots wrapped around and through the stone, and the canopy overhead was so thick that the light filtering through was tinted green. "This is where I come when I need to think," Thora said, settling on one of the massive roots. "I wanted to share it with you before the gathering when things become complicated." Garrett sat beside her, taking her hand. "Are you having doubts?" "No," Thora said immediately, "but I am worried. Some of the tribes are very traditional. They may challenge our bonding, which means I may have to fight to defend our right to be together." "Fight?" Garrett asked, alarm spiking through him. "What do you mean?" "In orc culture, when there is a dispute about a bonding, it can be settled through challenge combat," Thora explained. "If someone objects strongly enough, they can challenge me. If I lose, our bonding is considered invalid." "That is barbaric," Garrett said, then immediately regretted the words. "I am sorry, I did not mean it is barbaric," Thora agreed with a slight smile, "but it is also clear. Better to settle disputes through individual combat than through clan warfare. And you should know I have never lost a challenge fight, not once. I do not intend to start now." But you could be hurt, Garrett protested. All because you chose me. Thora, maybe we should wait. Maybe if we give the other tribes more time to get used to the idea. Thora silenced him with a kiss, brief but fierce, and when she pulled back her eyes were blazing. I will not wait. I will not hide what we are to each other. I am proud to have chosen you, Garrett Holloway, and I want all the tribes to know it. If someone wants to challenge that, let them. I will show them why I am called the strongest warrior. Despite his worry, Garrett felt a surge of love for this fierce, stubborn woman who was willing to fight for their right to be together. He pulled her close, and they sat beneath the ancient oak tree, wrapped in each other's arms, gathering strength for whatever was to come. The autumn gathering began with the arrival of the first guest tribes, 2 days later. Garrett watched from the edge of the settlement as groups of orcs emerged from the forest, some traveling with pack animals loaded with trade goods, others carrying weapons and armor that suggested they were warrior clans. The settlement's population swelled rapidly, and temporary shelters sprang up around the main village to accommodate everyone. Thora stayed close to Garrett, her presence a shield against hostile looks and muttered comments. Some orcs approached to greet her with clear respect, and when they saw Garrett, their reactions ranged from curious to openly disapproving. A few even spat on the ground when they passed, though they did not challenge Thora directly. The evening of the first day, there was a great feast where all the tribes gathered. Garrett sat beside Thora at the warrior's circle, acutely aware that he was the only human present. The chief made a speech welcoming everyone, and then various tribe leaders stood to make announcements or resolve disputes. Finally, the chief called for those who wished to formalize bondings to step forward. 3 orc couples moved into the firelight, and Garrett recognized the ceremony from descriptions Thora had given him. Each pair stood before the assembled tribes and spoke words of commitment, pledging to support each other through all challenges. It was simple but deeply moving. Then it was their turn. Thora stood, and Garrett stood with her, and together they walked into the firelight. The crowd's murmur grew into outright conversation, and Garrett could hear shock and disapproval in many voices. But he focused on Thora, on the strength in her amber eyes, and found his courage. "I am Thora," she said, her voice carrying across the gathering, "strongest warrior of the Mountain Oak tribe. I stand before you to formalize my bond with Garrett Holloway, formerly a human scout, now a member of my tribe." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Orcs leaped to their feet, shouting in their own language. The chief had to call for order repeatedly before the noise died down enough for him to be heard. "Does anyone challenge this bonding?" the chief asked formally, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. A massive orc stepped forward, his skin nearly black-green, his tusks filed to sharp points. He wore the armor of a war chief, and his reputation preceded him. Garrett had heard the name Targash whispered with fear and respect. He led one of the most traditional tribes, and his warriors were feared throughout the region. "I challenge," Targash said, his voice like grinding stone. "This bonding is an abomination. It weakens the orc people to mix our blood with humans. I challenge Thora's right to bond with this creature." Thora did not flinch. "I accept your challenge, Targash. Name your terms." "Single combat to submission or death," Targash said. "If I win, your human is cast out and you are forbidden from ever bonding with another human. If you win, I will acknowledge your bonding before all the tribes." "Agreed," Thora said without hesitation. "No," Garrett said, grabbing her arm. "Thora, he is twice your size. You cannot trust me," Thora said quietly, squeezing his hand. "I know what I am doing." She removed her bonding clothes, stripping down to simple leather trousers and a wrapped chest binding that would allow full movement. Targash did the same, and Garrett saw that the war chief's body was covered in scars from countless battles. This was not just a warrior. This was a legend. The crowd formed a circle, and Thora and Targash entered it. Someone handed Thora her great sword, and Targash drew his own massive blade. The weapons looked impossibly heavy to Garrett's eyes, but both warriors handled them with casual ease. "Begin," the chief called. Targash attacked immediately, a brutal overhead strike that would have split Thora in half if it had connected. But she was not there, sliding to the side with incredible speed and bringing her own sword around in a strike that Targash barely blocked. The clash of metal echoed across the gathering. They fought with a ferocity that terrified Garrett. This was not practice or play fighting. This was two master warriors trying to kill each other. Thora was faster, but Targash had reach and power. He drove her back with a series of hammering blows, and Garrett's heart was in his throat, certain the next strike would be the one that got through her defense. But Thora was not just fast. She was smart. She let Targash overextend on a particularly powerful swing, then stepped inside his guard and drove her elbow into his face. The war chief staggered back, blood streaming from his nose, and Thora pressed her advantage. The fight became a blur of movement and noise, swords clashing, warriors grunting with effort. Garrett could barely follow what was happening, but he could see that Thora was holding her own, matching Targash blow for blow. Then Targash made a mistake, dropping his guard for just a moment, and Thora was there. Her sword came around in a strike that should have ended the fight, but at the last second she turned the blade, hitting Targash with the flat rather than the edge. The impact still sent the massive orc flying backward to land heavily on the ground. Thora stood over him, her sword point at his throat, breathing hard but still strong. "Do you submit?" For a long moment Targash did not move. Then slowly he nodded. "I submit. Your bonding is valid." A roar went up from the crowd, some cheering and some protesting, but the fight was over. Thora lowered her sword and offered Targash her hand. The war chief stared at it for a moment, then took it, allowing her to pull him to his feet. "You fight well," Targash said, grudging respect in his voice. "Perhaps this human has more worth than I thought, if the strongest warrior would fight for him." "He has more worth than any of you can imagine," Thora said, "and I will fight anyone else who wishes to challenge that." No one else stepped forward. Thora had proven her point in the most direct way possible. She returned to Garrett's side and he threw his arms around her, not caring who saw. "You could have been killed," he said against her shoulder. "But I was not," Thora said, holding him close. "And now no one can question our right to be together." The bonding ceremony continued, with Thora and Garrett speaking the words of commitment before all the assembled tribes. Garrett's voice shook as he pledged himself to Thora, promising to stand beside her through all challenges, to honor her strength and cherish her vulnerability, to be her partner in all things. Thora's voice was steady and strong, and when she looked at him, Garrett saw his entire future in her amber eyes. They exchanged the traditional gifts, leather bracers marked with each other's symbols, visible signs of their bond that they would wear always. The chief blessed their union, calling upon the spirits of the mountains to protect them, and then it was done. They were bonded, recognized by all the tribes as a legitimate couple. The celebration that followed was the largest Garrett had ever seen. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and orcs from a dozen different tribes coming to offer congratulations or at least acknowledgement. Even Targash approached, his face still swollen from Thora's elbow, and offered a grudging nod of respect. Krogan was conspicuously absent from the well-wishers, and Garrett saw him watching from the shadows with undisguised hatred. But even Krogan could not challenge the bonding now, not after Thora had defended it in ritual combat before all the tribes. As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Thora pulled Garrett away from the crowd, leading him back to their longhouse. Inside, away from the noise and the watching eyes, they finally had privacy. "We did it," Garrett said, still hardly able to believe it. "We are actually bonded." "We are," Thora agreed, and there was wonder in her voice. "You are mine and I am yours for all the world to see." She pulled him close, and this time when they kissed there was no hesitation, no holding back. They had declared their commitment before their peoples, had fought for the right to be together, and now they were going to claim each other fully. Garrett let Thora lead, trusting her to know what she was doing, and she was gentle despite her strength, careful to never hurt him. They learned each other slowly, mapping bodies that were different but compatible, finding pleasure in the differences as much as the similarities. When they finally came together completely, Garrett felt something click into place in his soul, a sense of rightness and completion he had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, Garrett's head on Thora's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of her heart. Her hand stroked through his hair, and he had never felt so safe or so loved. "I never thought I could have this," Thora said quietly into the darkness. "I thought my strength made me too different, too intimidating. I thought I would always be alone." "You will never be alone again," Garrett promised. "I am here. I will always be here." "And I will always protect you," Thora said. "Always keep you safe. You are mine now, and I take care of what is mine." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and when morning came, Garrett woke to find Thora watching him with a soft smile. "What?" he asked, self-conscious. "I am just thinking how lucky I am," Thora said. "That you were a scout in the wrong place at the wrong time. That I was the one who found you, that you chose to stay." "I am the lucky one," Garrett countered. "You saved my life and then you gave me a new one better than anything I had before." "Then we are both lucky," Thora decided, "and we will make sure that luck lasts." The days after the gathering settled into a new normal. Garrett and Thora were bonded now, recognized by all the tribes, and that changed things in subtle ways. Other orcs who had been wary of Garrett began to accept him more readily, seeing that his bond with Thora was genuine and permanent. Children who had been curious, but cautious now approached freely, asking him to tell stories about human lands or teach them human words. Even some of Krogan's followers began to soften, though Krogan himself remained hostile. Garrett tried not to let it bother him, but Thora warned him to stay alert. Krogan was dangerous precisely because he would not challenge openly after Thora had won her ritual combat. He would look for other ways to cause problems. 3 months after the bonding, those problems arrived in the form of Lord Pemberton's army. Scouts spotted the forces moving through the mountains, heading directly for the settlement. They were still 2 days away, but the tribe went into immediate defensive preparations. Garrett stood with the other warriors, helping to reinforce defenses and prepare weapons, and tried not to think about the fact that he would soon be fighting against people who had once been his comrades. But he had made his choice, and he would not abandon his new family now. The night before the expected battle, Thora held him close and said, "You do not have to fight tomorrow. No one would blame you for staying out of it." "I have to fight," Garrett said. "This is my home now, these are my people, and I will not hide while others defend what we have built together." "Then we fight together," Thora said. "And we survive together. I have not come this far only to lose you to human swords." The next day, Lord Pemberton's forces arrived at the valley below the settlement. Garrett was shocked to see how many soldiers there were, at least 500 armed men, all prepared for battle. The orc tribe numbered less than 300, and not all of them were warriors. If it came to open combat, the orcs would be badly outnumbered. But the chief did not immediately order an attack. Instead, he sent envoys down to the human camp, requesting a parley. After some discussion, Lord Pemberton agreed, bringing a small guard up to meet with the orc leaders. Garrett stood with the other warriors as Lord Pemberton and his retinue approached, and he saw the exact moment the Lord recognized him. Pemberton's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to confusion to something that might have been hope. "Garrett Holloway," Pemberton said, his voice carrying across the space between them. "I had thought you dead. Your return is most welcome. Come, we have much to discuss about what you learned during your captivity." "I am not returning, my lord," Garrett said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am no longer a scout in your service. I am a member of this tribe now." Pemberton's expression hardened. "They have coerced you, threatened you. I understand, boy, but you are safe now. We are here to liberate you and punish these savages for their crimes." "No one has coerced me," Garrett said, stepping forward so he stood between the human soldiers and the orc warriors. "I chose to stay here. I have bonded with one of their warriors. This is my home and these are my people. I am asking you, my lord, please do not attack. These orcs want only peace." "Bonded," Pemberton repeated, his face going red. "You mean to tell me you have taken up with one of these monsters? Have you lost your mind? They are not people, Holloway. They are animals, and we are here to drive them from our lands." "These are not your lands," Thora said, moving to stand beside Garrett. "We were here long before your people came. We have harmed no one. We simply wish to live in peace." Pemberton's eyes swept over Thora, taking in her size and her weapons, and the way she stood protectively close to Garrett. Understanding dawned, and his expression turned to disgust. "So this is the creature that bewitched you," he said to Garrett. "I had heard orcs use dark magic to enslave humans, but I did not believe it until now." "There is no magic," Garrett said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "There is only choice. I chose to stay here because I found something worth more than gold or glory. I found love and acceptance and a home. Please, my lord, do not force me to fight against you. Just withdraw your forces and leave these people in peace." "Leave in peace?" Pemberton laughed harshly. "After you have betrayed everything you are, everything you were taught? No, Holloway. I came here to clear these mountains of the orc menace, and that is exactly what I intend to do. If you stand with them, then you are a traitor and you will be treated as such." He turned to the chief. "You have until dawn tomorrow to surrender. Disarm your warriors and submit to human rule or face annihilation. Those are your only choices. Then we will see you at dawn," the chief said calmly. "And you will learn that orcs do not surrender." Pemberton and his retinue left, and Garrett felt something break inside his chest. There would be a battle. People he had once called friends would die, or people he now called family would die, or both. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. That night, Garrett barely slept. He lay beside Thora, listening to her breathe, memorizing the feel of her body against his in case these were their last hours together. She was awake too, he knew, both of them too tense to find rest. "I am sorry," Garrett said into the darkness. "This is my fault. If I had not been here, maybe Pemberton would have been more willing to negotiate." "This is not your fault," Thora said fiercely. "Pemberton came here intending war. Your presence changed nothing except to give us warning. Do not blame yourself for his hatred. Still, I have to try one more time. Maybe if I go down to their camp, if I explain, they will kill you or capture you," Thora interrupted. "You heard him. He called you a traitor. You cannot reason with that kind of hate." "Then what do we do?" Garrett asked helplessly. "We fight. Thora said simply. We defend our home and our family, and we trust that the spirits will guide us. Dawn came too quickly. The orc warriors assembled at the edge of the settlement, armed and armored, their faces grim but determined. Garrett stood with them, wearing borrowed armor and carrying a sword that Thora had helped him choose. His hands shook as he gripped the weapon, but he forced himself to stay calm. Lord Pemberton's forces advanced up the valley in formation, shields locked, spears ready. They looked professional and deadly, and Garrett's heart sank at the sight of them. How could the orcs possibly win against such a force? But the chief had a plan. As the human forces approached, orc archers hidden in the rocks above began raining arrows down on them. The attack came from multiple directions, forcing Pemberton's formations to break as soldiers sought cover. Then the orc warriors charged, their superior knowledge of the terrain allowing them to appear and disappear like ghosts, striking hard and then melting back into cover before the humans could respond effectively. It was not the pitched battle Pemberton had expected. It was guerrilla warfare, and the orcs were masters at it. Still, the human forces had numbers on their side, and slowly they pushed forward, taking casualties but advancing steadily toward the settlement. Garrett found himself in the thick of the fighting, his sword clashing against shields and spears, his body moving on instinct as training took over. He tried not to think about the men he was facing, tried not to remember shared meals around campfires or jokes told during long marches. These were enemies now, coming to destroy everything he loved. Thora fought nearby, a whirlwind of death with her great sword, and Garrett saw soldiers fall before her like wheat before a scythe. She was magnificent and terrible, and he understood in that moment why she was called the strongest warrior. She was not just skilled. She was unstoppable. The battle raged for hours, both sides taking heavy casualties. Garrett took a cut across his arm and another along his ribs, but he kept fighting, kept moving, driven by fear and love and desperate determination. Around him, orcs and humans screamed and died, and he wanted to weep at the waste of it all. Then, through the chaos, Garrett saw Krogan moving through the battlefield with purpose. The scarred orc was heading toward where Lord Pemberton directed his forces, and Garrett realized with cold horror what Krogan intended. He was going to kill the human lord, which would almost certainly cause the human forces to fight to the last man in revenge. Without thinking, Garrett broke away from the battle line and ran after Krogan. He caught up to the orc warrior just as Krogan was raising his axe over a wounded Pemberton, who had been unhorsed and separated from his guards. "Stop!" Garrett shouted, throwing himself between Krogan and the Lord. "Do not do this." Krogan's face twisted with rage. "Get out of my way, human. This man came to destroy us. He deserves death." "He deserves mercy," Garrett said, though he had to force the words out. "Killing him will not end this. It will only make everything worse." "You dare protect him," Krogan snarled. "You dare stand against your own people." "These are my people," Garrett said, gesturing at the orcs around them. "But that does not mean I want to see more bloodshed. Please, Krogan, let me try to end this without more death." For a long moment, Krogan did not move, his axe still raised. Then Thora appeared, her sword at Krogan's throat. "Lower your weapon," she said quietly. "Garrett speaks wisdom. Killing their lord will only ensure this war never ends." Krogan glared at her, at Garrett, at Pemberton lying wounded on the ground. Then, slowly, he lowered the axe. "You are both fools, but I will not disobey our champion." He spat on the ground near Garrett's feet and stalked away. Garrett knelt beside Lord Pemberton, checking his wounds. They were serious but not immediately fatal. Around them, the sounds of battle were beginning to fade as both sides disengaged, warriors too exhausted to continue. Why? Pemberton asked weakly, staring up at Garrett. Why save me? I called you a traitor. I came to destroy your new home. Because enough people have died today, Garrett said simply. And because maybe, if you survive, you can tell other humans that orcs are not the monsters they think. That there is another way besides war. Pemberton was silent for a moment, then laughed bitterly. You have changed, Holloway. The boy I sent into these mountains would never have spoken like this. The boy you sent into these mountains died, Garrett said, and maybe that is for the best. He was full of hate and prejudice, convinced he knew who the enemy was. I know better now. Over the next hour, a fragile peace was negotiated. Both sides had taken heavy casualties, and neither had the strength to continue the battle. The chief and Lord Pemberton met again, this time with Garrett serving as translator and mediator, helping them find common ground. In the end, an agreement was reached. Lord Pemberton's forces would withdraw and would not return as long as the orcs remained peaceful. In exchange, the orcs would allow humans to travel through the mountains unmolested and would open trade relations. It was not perfect, but it was a start. As Pemberton's forces began their retreat, the Lord approached Garrett one final time. I still think you are a fool, Holloway. But perhaps you are a brave fool. You stood between armies today to save lives on both sides. That takes courage I am not sure I possess. I stood between armies because I love people on both sides, Garrett said. I hope someday that will not be necessary. I hope someday humans and orcs can live in peace without needing people like me to bridge the gap. Perhaps, Pemberton said. But until that day comes, I am glad you are here. Take care of yourself, Garrett Holloway, and take care of that orc woman of yours. She fights like a demon. She is the strongest warrior, Garrett said with pride. And she is mine and I am hers. That is all that matters. Pemberton shook his head but smiled slightly. Farewell, traitor. May you find the happiness you seek. When the human forces were gone and the settlement began tending to their wounded, Garrett finally allowed himself to collapse. Thora caught him before he hit the ground, her strong arms supporting him, and he leaned into her embrace with a shuddering sigh. It is over, he said, hardly able to believe it. We survived. We did more than survive, Thora said, her voice thick with emotion. You stopped a massacre today, Garrett. You stood between two armies and demanded peace. You are the bravest person I have ever known. I was terrified the entire time, Garrett admitted. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Thora said. It is acting despite your fear. You saved countless lives today, human and orc alike. I am so proud of you. She carried him back to their longhouse, and Gresha came to tend his wounds. They were not as serious as he had feared, painful but not life-threatening. While the healer worked, Garrett learned that the tribe had lost 14 warriors, with many more wounded. The humans had fared worse, with over 50 dead and many more injured. It was a terrible toll, but it could have been so much worse. Over the following weeks, the settlement slowly recovered from the battle. The dead were mourned and honored according to orc tradition, and Garrett found himself grieving for friends he had made in his months with the tribe. Even Krogan approached him one day, his expression unreadable. You saved my life today, Krogan said abruptly. If you had not stopped me from killing the human lord, his soldiers would have torn me apart in revenge. I saved many lives today, Garrett said carefully, not sure where this conversation was going. Yes, Krogan agreed. You did. I have hated you since the day Thora claimed you. I thought you were a weakness, a threat to our tribe. I was wrong. He paused, clearly struggling with the words. You are not a weakness. You are a bridge, as the chief said, and today you proved your worth to everyone, even to those of us who doubted you. He offered his hand, and after a moment of surprise, Garrett took it. Krogan's grip was crushing, but there was no hostility in it anymore. Just a kind of grudging respect. "Welcome to the tribe, Garrett Holloway," Krogan said. "Truly welcome, not just tolerated." After he left, Thora emerged from where she had been listening and wrapped her arms around Garrett from behind. "I told you," she said, her breath warm against his ear. "I told you they would come to accept you." "You did," Garrett agreed, "though I did not expect it to require nearly dying in battle." "The best things in life require sacrifice," Thora said. "You sacrificed everything you were to become who you are now. That kind of courage does not go unnoticed." That winter was the happiest of Garrett's life. He and Thora fell into an easy domestic rhythm, working together to maintain their longhouse and contribute to the tribe's winter preparations. He continued to improve his skills, both with the orc language and with weapons, and gradually he became not the human who lived among orcs, but simply another member of the tribe. Trade with human settlements began tentatively, with Garrett often serving as translator and mediator. It was slow work, building trust between peoples who had been enemies for generations, but every successful exchange was a small victory. Other orcs and humans began to see that cooperation was possible, that they could coexist peacefully. Spring brought news that Thora was pregnant. She announced it casually one morning over breakfast, and Garrett nearly choked on his food. A child. They were going to have a child, something he had not even dared to imagine. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Gresha confirmed it yesterday," Thora said, and her smile was radiant. "We are going to be parents, Garrett." He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and fear and desperate love. A child that would be both human and orc, a living symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had built together. The pregnancy was challenging, both because of the physical demands and because no one was quite sure what to expect from a human orc child. But Thora was strong, and Gresha was experienced, and as the months passed, Garrett watched his bonded partner grow with their child and felt a contentment he had never known before. Their daughter was born on a cool autumn evening, exactly 1 year after their bonding ceremony. She had her mother's green skin, but it was a lighter shade, closer to jade than forest green. Her eyes were hazel, somewhere between Garrett's brown and Thora's amber. She had small tusks, barely visible now but likely to grow more prominent as she aged. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Thora asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness as she held their daughter. "Something that honors both our peoples," Garrett said. "Something that represents hope and new beginnings." They decided on Kiera, a name that worked in both human and orc tongues, meaning new dawn. It felt right for a child who represented the dawn of a new era, when humans and orcs could not just coexist, but build families together. The tribe celebrated Kiera's birth with a great feast, and orcs came from neighboring tribes to see the first known human orc child. Some looked on with wonder, others with concern, but none with the outright hostility Garrett had feared. Even Krogan came to pay his respects, and he looked at baby Kiera with something that might have been awe. "She is strong," Krogan said approvingly. "I can tell already." "She will be a great warrior someday." "Or a great healer," Gresha interjected. "Or a great leader. She will be whatever she chooses to be." As the seasons turned and Kiera grew, Garrett watched his daughter navigate a world that was learning to accept people like her. She was curious and fearless, with her mother's strength and her father's empathy. Other children, both full-blooded orcs and the few other mixed-heritage children who had been born in the years since Garrett and Thora's bonding, played with her without concern for her differences. To them, she was just Kiera, their friend. It was not always easy. There were still those who disapproved, who muttered about the corruption of bloodlines or the weakness of mixing peoples. But they were a minority now, and growing smaller each year as the benefits of peace and cooperation became undeniable. 5 years after Kiera's birth, the chief called a great gathering of all the tribes in the region, human settlements included. It was unprecedented, but the old orc insisted it was time. Time to formalize the peace that had grown organically from trade and shared interests into something more permanent. Garrett and Thora attended with their daughter, now a bright and energetic 5-year-old who charmed everyone she met. The gathering lasted 3 days, with representatives from dozens of communities coming together to hammer out agreements and treaties. There were disagreements and heated debates, but in the end, a comprehensive peace accord was signed. As part of the ceremony, the various leaders asked Garrett and Thora to speak about their journey, about how they had overcome prejudice and hatred to build a life together. Standing before hundreds of humans and orcs, holding his daughter's hand while his bonded partner stood proudly beside him, Garrett tried to find words adequate to the moment. 7 years ago, I was a scout for an army preparing to attack the orc settlements, he began. I believed I knew who my enemies were. I believed orcs were monsters, incapable of mercy or honor. But when I was captured and brought before Thora, she chose compassion instead of cruelty. She saw me not as an enemy soldier, but as a person who deserved a chance at life. He looked at Thora, seeing the love and pride in her amber eyes. She taught me that true strength is not about dominating others, but about protecting those who need protection. She showed me that honor and compassion are not weaknesses, but the foundations of a good life. And she gave me a home when I had nowhere else to turn. Thora took over, her voice strong and clear. Garrett taught me that love knows no boundaries of race or species. He showed me that taking a risk on someone different can lead to the greatest rewards. Together, we have built a life that honors both our peoples, that celebrates our differences while embracing what we have in common. They lifted Kiera between them, and their daughter waved at the assembled crowd with uninhibited joy. This is what peace looks like, Garrett said. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding and acceptance. Not pretending our differences do not exist, but celebrating what makes us unique while working together toward common goals. The crowd erupted in cheers, and as Garrett looked out at the sea of faces, human and orc alike, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what he and Thora had fought for, what they had risked everything to achieve. Not just their own happiness, but a future where children like Kiera could grow up without knowing the hatred and prejudice that had defined previous generations. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their longhouse, Kiera asleep between them, Thora took Garrett's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing to stay here, giving up your old life." Garrett thought about the scared young scout who had run through the forest 7 years ago, certain he was about to die. He thought about everything he had gained since that day, every challenge overcome, and every moment of joy earned through struggle and sacrifice. "Not for a single moment," he said honestly. "That life was not mine. This is. You are. Kiera is. This family, this tribe, this fragile piece we are building together. This is what I was meant for, even if I did not know it back then." Thora leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains. Around them, the settlement bustled with evening activity, children playing their last games before bedtime, adults finishing their daily tasks, the smell of cooking fires and the sound of laughter floating on the breeze. Years later, when Garrett was an old man and his daughter had children of her own, people would still tell the story of the human scout who was captured by an orc tribe and changed the world. They would tell of Thora, the strongest warrior, who looked at an injured enemy and chose mercy. They would speak of the love that grew between two people from different worlds, a love strong enough to bridge divides that had seemed insurmountable. But for Garrett and Thora, living in those quiet years of peace and plenty, the story was simpler. It was not about grand historical moments or world-changing decisions. It was about two people who chose each other every day through all the challenges and joys that life brought. It was about building a home together, raising a daughter together, growing old together. It was about love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. And in the end, that was the only story that truly mattered. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Garrett and Thora's family grew. Two more children came, a son they named Darian and another daughter they named Sella. Each birth was a celebration not just for their family, but for the entire tribe, symbols of the new era of peace and cooperation. Kiera grew into a strong and confident young woman, her mixed heritage making her a natural bridge between human and orc communities. She had inherited her mother's warrior spirit, but combined it with her father's diplomatic skills, and she quickly became known throughout the region as a peacekeeper and mediator. Darian was quieter, more contemplative, with a gift for healing that had Gresha claiming him as her apprentice before he was even 10 years old. He spent hours learning the properties of plants and how to treat various injuries, and his gentle manner put even the most nervous patients at ease. Sella was the youngest, wild and fearless, with a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. She climbed trees that should have been impossible to climb and befriended every animal she encountered, bringing home injured birds and orphaned rabbits that she insisted needed her care. Watching his children grow, Garrett felt a contentment so deep, it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. This was what he and Thora had fought for, what they had risked everything to achieve. Not just their own happiness, but a world where their children could thrive without the hatred and fear that had defined previous generations. The tribe prospered under the peace that Garrett and Thora had helped establish. Trade with human settlements brought prosperity to both peoples, and intermarriage became more common as other couples followed their example. The boundaries between human and orc began to blur, replaced by a new identity that honored both heritages. Garrett continued to serve as a translator and mediator, his unique position as a human who had fully integrated into orc society, giving him credibility with both peoples. He helped negotiate trade agreements, settle disputes, and facilitate exchanges of knowledge and culture. It was rewarding work, seeing the fruits of peace grow year by year. Thora remained the strongest warrior for many years, though eventually age began to slow her as it did everyone. When she was finally challenged and bested by a younger warrior, it was Kiera who won the title, becoming the first human-orc hybrid to claim the position. Garrett had never been prouder than the day he watched his daughter accept the great sword that symbolized her new status. As Garrett entered his 6th decade, his hair gray and his body bearing the marks of a long and active life, he found himself reflecting more and more on the strange path his life had taken. From a scared young scout running for his life to an elder of the tribe, respected and loved, father and grandfather, bridge between two peoples. One evening, sitting with Thora and watching their grandchildren play in the fading light, she asked him the same question she had asked decades earlier. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing to stay?" Garrett smiled and took her hand, his fingers threading through hers with the ease of long practice. Her skin was weathered now, marked with scars from a lifetime of battles and work, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her in that forest clearing. "How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" he asked. "Look at what we built, Thora. Look at our family, our community, the peace we helped create. This is legacy beyond anything I could have imagined as a young scout. This is meaning and purpose and love." Thora leaned against him, and they sat together in comfortable silence. Two old warriors who had fought their greatest battle not with swords but with compassion and courage. Around them, the settlement thrived, human and orc living together in harmony, and their grandchildren played without any understanding of how remarkable their existence truly was. That, Garrett thought, was the greatest victory of all. That their grandchildren took peace for granted, that they had never known a world where humans and orcs were enemies. The hatred and prejudice that had seemed so insurmountable when Garrett first arrived had been replaced by acceptance and understanding. It was not perfect. There were still tensions sometimes, still people who clung to old prejudices. But they were the exception now rather than the rule, and each generation grew up more accepting than the last. As the stars began to appear overhead and the evening grew cool, Garrett and Thora finally rose and walked back to their longhouse, their steps slower than they once were, but their love as strong as ever. Inside, they settled by the fire, and Garrett found himself thinking about the young man he had been, running through these mountains in terror, certain he was about to die. That young man had died in a way. He had died and been reborn as someone better, someone stronger, someone capable of love beyond the boundaries of prejudice and fear. And in dying, he had found more life than he ever could have imagined. "Thank you," Garrett said quietly, and Thora looked at him with questioning eyes. "Thank you for seeing me in that clearing. Thank you for choosing mercy. Thank you for loving me even when it was difficult. Thank you for this life we built together." Thora's eyes grew bright with tears, and she pulled him close. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for showing me that love knows no boundaries. Thank you for our children and our life, and every moment we have shared." They held each other by the fire, two souls who had found each other across impossible divides, and Garrett knew that whatever time they had left, however many years or days or moments, he would spend them here with her, grateful for every breath. The story of the human scout captured by an orc tribe, of the strongest warrior who claimed him as hers, of the love that grew between them and changed the world, would be told for generations. But for Garrett and Thora, the story was simply their life, lived fully and completely with love at its center. And that was the only ending they needed, the only one that mattered. Together, in peace, surrounded by the family and community they had built, they lived out their days in contentment and joy, a testament to the power of choosing compassion over hatred, love over fear, and hope over despair. Their story was complete, and it was beautiful.